So threw it out there yesterday, Courtney, for Judd Zulgad and the Twitterers, whether we think that winning this way will work for the Minnesota Vikings. And I mean by this way, because some people needed clarification, just playing hard defense, being really good on defense, leading the league in rush attempts, being low in the NFL in pass attempts, and getting key turnovers, not turning the ball over yourself. I mean, this is the model that teams have used for a long time to win. It's either you track meet everybody or you play strong defense, or you're just great at both, and that usually means you're the Patriots. So I put it out there for a Twitter poll yesterday, and it was basically right down the middle. Some people thought, half the audience thought that you could definitely keep winning this way because it's worked for teams in the past. And then the other half thought, no way, you're going to have to be way, way more explosive in your passing game, or you're just not going to win. So it ended up 53% said, yes, you can keep doing this. 47% said no for 1,400 votes. So where do you stand on that?
I stand and pick your spots with where you can do it. I mean, certainly the game plan did not call for this. The score in the way that they were able to score 21 points quickly in the first half off turnovers, that's what allowed them to do it. Like, why would you put yourself in a position to pass if you don't need to, knowing who your quarterback is? And I mean, think about Kirk Cousins' play that we saw throughout this game. It was kind of shaky. He had those 2 fumbles. He had some good throws, and he did exactly what he had to do. It wasn't a great performance, but it was good. I think the more pressure you can take off of him to have to execute, and whether he likes that or not, I'm sure everybody has an ego. Everybody's a competitor. Everybody wants to win the game and be the hero. But if you can win a game this way, and you can do it against, I don't know, a third of your schedule, why wouldn't you? There is the thought with Dalvin Cook, and I mean, he was fine. He was healthy. He played fantastic, but health-wise, he's fine. Can you do this with other guys, though, if you're trying not to wear him into the ground early on this season? I mean, can you pick spots and have Alexander Madison be the guy, or, have a combination of Madison and Boone or Madison and Abdullah? I don't know. Like, I don't think it's sustainable to think that this is going to be a trend that continues all that often.
Yeah, and I see from 538, they wrote a piece about what the Vikings did in terms of their run-pass ratio. And I would love to ask, what would you do when you're up 21 and you're running like crazy over them? The Atlanta Falcons could not stop Dalvin Cook or Alexander Madison, who ran 9 times for 49 yards. What would you do? I would just keep giving it to the running back, too. Atlanta couldn't score. They weren't moving the ball very well. When they did, they threw it to Anthony Harris. And so they fumbled the times that they moved the ball. If I were Gary Kubiak, I don't think it matters if it's Gary or Bill Walsh or McVay or anybody. I think every coach would be like, okay, up 3 scores and you can't move against us. Why should we bother risking throwing a pass?
Yeah, and the clock is your friend in this time. It's not always going to be that way. Like, this is how teams get to the Super Bowl, wearing down the other team methodically. And that's exactly what they did. Like, yeah, there might be times where they have to get into a shootout like they did with the Rams last year to win a game. But I think with the run, and it's not just Mike Zimmer wanting this sort of imbalance. I know we talked about balance, but if you read between the lines there, that's more run first mentality, defense, placed out defense, and don't screw up on special teams. The rest of the stuff on offense, it's an expensive game manager, but essentially that's kind of the role that sometimes Kirk Cousins will be relegated to take on. And if you don't care about like stats, or if you don't care about things like that, and you just care about what happens in the win-loss column, that matters, then that's fine. And you can get by that way. But to think that this is something that's sustainable, I mean, look at what I wrote in my article coming out of the game on Sunday. What happened against the Packers in the Packers-Bears game last week. Like, I don't think this is a model that's going to transition over into week 2 by any stretch. Because watch, the Bears did try to run early. Like, they had 10 runs in the first quarter. And what happened? They got behind and they had to abandon the run. This exact same thing happened to the Vikings in so many situations last year. So when you're forced back into shotgun and that's very obvious you're going to pass or you're going to run play action out of it 85% of the time, like, you become one-dimensional. And it's hard, but like, what are you going to do? If you're down and you have to score points and your run game isn't working because you're running into a brand new defensive front thanks to free agency in the draft and all of the good stuff that they have there, that's going to be a problem. So I don't think that you can realistically expect and like pick on the calendar, be like, oh, this is something that's good. This would be a great time to employ the same strategy. Though I do think the run first mentality, you're still going to see that throughout the season. I mean, that's still going to be their identity as much as this lopsidedness kind of skews it in one direction.
Right. And that's exactly what I was getting at when we're talking about the sustainability of this whole thing. Is it in terms of a plan, will it work? Not that every game you're going to run 38 times and pass 10, because that's just ridiculous. I looked at last year, Seattle had the lowest number of passes over the last 5 years, and they threw 27 a game. So, I mean, clearly you're not going to throw 10 on a week-to-week basis. But something that Seattle did, this is very interesting, I think, when it comes to how the Vikings have just their general set mentality as an offense.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that this is most certainly the best and clear, most efficient way to do it in the analytics era. But Seattle did get themselves into the playoffs playing this way, and they did not have anywhere near the talent last year on defense that the Vikings have. So they were up toward the top of the league in yards per attempt, and they were number one in turnover percentage when it came to their offense, and yards per attempt were, passing. So the 427 passes that they did throw had good efficiency, many of which were on play action, which the Vikings want to use a lot. And then they never turned the ball over. Number one in the NFL at not turning the ball over. And they end up going 10-6 and getting into the playoffs. And they were very similar to that. Fewest passes, lowest turnover percentage when they got into the Super Bowl in 2014 and should have run Marshawn Lynch. Yeah. But they had to rank number one in defense in points and yards in order to get to the Super Bowl. They had to have a dominant defense. This strategy also worked for the 2015 Vikings, who had the fewest pass attempts in the league.
Exactly. And that's what I just brought up Teddy Bridgewater's stats to look at that 2015 season when they got into the playoffs. Like, that's the type of quarterback play that Mike Zimmer is most comfortable with. That's why he loved Teddy Bridgewater. It's why that relationship worked out so well from a defensive-minded coach, wants a conservative-style quarterback. I mean, there's a certain number of wins here that are very reminiscent when I went back and looked at the numbers to what kind of that feel that we had on Sunday, not obviously as extreme. He had 18 pass attempts against Detroit in a win in week 2. No turnovers that game. If you go down, he had another game against St. Louis when the Rams are still in St. Louis at that point, when he had 21 passing attempts, a win. When they played Oakland, 22 passing attempts, a win. You go down further than that, 20 passing attempts against Chicago, a win. 19 against Green Bay, a win. I mean, in his completion percentage, he was doing kind of the exact same type of thing that Kirk Cousins was tasked with on Sunday.
Yep.
Like, be a game manager. You can rely on, you don't have to make, you can rely on a lot of short passes. You can rely on the check down game. You can rely on screens. But playing like this, it's not a sexy style of football. I know a lot of people say it's boring. Even Mike Zimmer, when I asked him about, it was actually more of a question about complementary football, but then he kind of went into how that wasn't even normal, that 1 4-play series where it was like, well, what just happened, inside US Bank Stadium? And he mentioned, it's like, yeah, ran the ball a lot. It's people are going to say it's boring. Well, it still wins you games. Like that, and with a dynamic running back like Dalvin Cook, I know there is going to be a need to see him in the passing game a little bit more this season. I am curious how often that's going to show up. But if you can run him effectively, this is exactly what you brought Gary Kubiak in to do. Create an outside zone scheme that's predicated on the run, and put pieces around Kirk Cousins that will work to what his strengths are and mitigate what his strengths aren't.
So to your point about 2015, this is what Mike Zimmer loved so much about Teddy Bridgewater, is that they had a very low turnover percentage in 2015. They were 7th, but they scored a lot on their drives. They got a lot of field goals that year when Blair Walsh remembered how to kick, and they were 7th in the league in scoring percentage. So when they had the ball, they were often scoring. He was moving the ball down the field when he was throwing the ball. Not necessarily hitting on big plays all the time, but just keeping drives going. They controlled the clock, all those things, and it worked. And they went 11-5 and almost won a playoff game, if not for Blair. And so this strategy, I don't know whether it can win you the Super Bowl. I think
it can get you there.
I tend to think that it can't win you the Super Bowl.
I think it can get you there. But you're going to run into other teams in the NFC, like the Saints, the Rams, where this strategy is probably not going to work.
Right. It can definitely win you the division, though. Sure. And then anytime you're in the playoffs, you've got a shot. And it's not like they don't have any offensive talent. Usually, this is the difference with the Vikings playing this way in 2015, to a lot of extent in 2017, where they ran the ball, I think the seventh most in the league. And then this year is that they have a lot of talent to work with. So you're using a strategy that often is employed by teams that stink. And last year, here's a great way to look at this, is that Miami, Arizona, and Buffalo threw the ball as much last year as Seattle. They were the next teams ranked. Those teams were terrible last year. So of course they were trying to like hang on to the ball and hang on for dear life. But when it's put in with a team that's actually good and has lots of talent, then I think you've got a much better chance to win your division and then see where you go from there.